A deep rumble drifts across the horizon. It's not thunder. No rain has fallen here for years. It's the wind, carrying dust thick enough to block out the sun. Across the Great Plains of America, in 1932, the Earth itself seemed to be dying. Once called the breadbasket of the world, the Central Plains now looked like the surface of another planet, gray, silent, and broken. That year, hunger became a shadow in nearly every home. Farmers who had grown wheat rich enough to feed cities now watched their land crumble beneath their boots. The soil no longer held promise, it held despair. Even the sky looked different, painted in shades of brown and orange, as if nature itself had turned against those who depended on it most. At dawn, when the wind paused, a strange stillness settled over the plains. You could walk for miles without hearing a single bird. Barns stood half-buried, their doors sealed by dunes of dust. Families nailed wet cloths to windows, trying to keep the dirt out. Children coughed through the night, their lungs filled with grit. Mothers swept floors again and again, though everyone knew the dust would return before they could finish breakfast. The narrator's tone deepens. Between 1931 and 1933, over 100 million acres of farmland turned to wasteland. Farmers didn't just lose their crops, they lost their hope. The land that once fed America was now starving right alongside her people. Still, they tried to plant. They lined up on their tractors, turning the dry soil as they had always done, waiting for rain that never came. Each time the plows cut deeper, they loosened more of the earth, feeding the same storms that would later bury them. It was a cruel cycle. Plow, plant, pray, and lose it all again. Throughout Kansas, Oklahoma, Colorado, and Texas, life became a test of endurance. Entire towns disappeared, swallowed by drifting fields. Newspapers called the storms black blizzards. Scientists would later call it the Dust Bowl. But in the moment, for those who lived it, there were no names, only survival. One could stand in the middle of a highway and see nothing at all. The day turned to night in minutes. Dust-filled engines, stopped trains, and buried livestock alive. Photographers captured pale faces behind cracked glass, eyes wide with disbelief. In every image, one truth echoed: America was hungry, not only for food but for a solution. In the heart of this devastation, a few farmers refused to abandon their land. Among them was a man named Henry Holt, a quiet, wiry farmer from western Kansas. His story would come later, but on these very plains, he began noticing things others didn't. How the wind carved patterns in the soil, how water vanished the instant it touched the ground. While others packed their wagons and left, Holt stayed behind, his eyes fixed on the dying land as if searching for a way to bring it back to life. It's easy to think of starvation as a lack of food, the narrator continues, his voice slowing. But in 1932, it was something deeper, a starvation of spirit. The farmers weren't just feeding families, they were feeding the nation's sense of progress. And now, progress had turned to dust. The scene closes on a sweeping aerial image, miles of cracked earth, dotted with abandoned homes. A lone windmill creaks in the wind. Far below, a single figure walks through the haze, a farmer, head down, carrying nothing but a shovel. The frame lingers long enough for the audience to feel the weight of that choice, to stay when nearly everyone else was leaving. As the sky burns red with another failing sunset, the narrator leaves the audience with a thought. In that endless sea of dust, where hope seemed buried forever, one man began to imagine the impossible, the return of life to the dead land. Henry Holt was not a man who drew attention. He stood average height, his frame lean from decades of physical labor. His hands were scarred and sunburned, his face etched with lines that told stories of too many seasons spent staring at empty fields. He spoke rarely, and when he did, his words were practical, never poetic, never hopeful. He was the kind of man who fixed things quietly and moved on. But in 1932, there was nothing left to fix. His farm, located just outside Garden City, Kansas, sat at the edge of what would become the epicenter of the Dust Bowl. The 160 acres his father had worked before him now looked like a graveyard. Wheat stalks that should have been waist-high barely broke the surface before withering. The soil, once dark and rich, had turned pale gray, crumbling like ash in his hands. Most of his neighbors had already left. They packed what they could carry, abandoned their homes, and headed west toward California, chasing rumors of work and water. Henry watched them go, one family at a time, until the surrounding homesteads stood empty. He didn't judge them. Leaving made sense. Staying didn't. And yet, he stayed. Henry Holt didn't stay because he believed things would get better, the narrator explains. He stayed because leaving felt like surrender, and surrender to a man like him was worse than dying. Each morning, he walked his land. Not out of routine, but out of necessity. He needed to understand what had gone wrong. The wind had always blown here. That wasn't new. The droughts came and went in cycles. That was nature. But something deeper had broken. The land itself no longer responded the way it used to. He knelt in the dirt one afternoon, pressing his palm flat against the ground. It was hard as stone. When the rare rain came, it didn't sink in. It pooled on the surface, evaporating within hours. The roots of his wheat couldn't penetrate deep enough to find moisture. The soil had compacted so tightly that it suffocated everything trying to grow. Henry didn't have scientific language for what he was observing. He didn't know terms like soil erosion or capillary action. But he understood cause and effect. He understood that the old ways, the ways his father had taught him, no longer worked. One evening, sitting at his kitchen table, he sketched rough diagrams in a worn ledger. Lines representing trenches. Circles showing water flow. Arrows indicating direction. His wife, Margaret, watched him from the doorway, arms crossed. She didn't ask what he was doing. She had learned long ago that Henry worked things out in silence. What Henry began imagining that night wasn't irrigation in the traditional sense, the narrator continues. Farmers had used ditches and channels for centuries. But those systems required constant water flow, something the Dust Bowl didn't have. Henry needed something different. Something that used less water but delivered it deeper. The next morning, he began digging. Not in straight lines like the old furrows, but in a grid pattern across a small section of his field. He salvaged materials wherever he could find them. Old metal pipes from a collapsed barn, rusted drums from an abandoned gas station, sections of corrugated tin. Piece by piece, he constructed a crude underground network. His plan was simple in theory. Bury the pipes just beneath the soil surface, allowing water to seep directly to the roots instead of evaporating in the sun. If he could control the flow, slowly, steadily, he might stretch a single rainfall across weeks instead of hours. The work was brutal. The ground resisted every strike of the shovel. The heat was relentless, the dust storms frequent. Several times, Henry had to stop and cover his face as clouds of dirt rolled across the field, undoing hours of labor. But he kept digging. Neighbors who hadn't yet left would sometimes pass by on the road, slowing their trucks to watch. They thought he had lost his mind. One man shouted from his window, "You planting pipes now, Holt? That gonna feed your family." Henry didn't respond. He just kept working. By late summer, the system was finished. It wasn't elegant. Pipes jutted unevenly from the soil, connected by makeshift joints sealed with tar and cloth. The whole thing looked like something a child might build from scrap. But when the first light rain fell in early September, Henry stood at the edge of his field and watched. The water didn't pool. It didn't run off. It sank slowly into the buried channels, disappearing beneath the surface. For the first time in over a year, moisture reached the roots. Within 2 weeks, green shoots appeared. Tiny, fragile, but undeniably alive. Henry knelt beside them, running his fingers over the thin blades. His face remained expressionless, but his eyes told a different story: relief, disbelief, and something close to vindication. Margaret came out to see it for herself. She stood beside him, saying nothing. After a long silence, she spoke softly. "You think it'll last?" Henry stared at the small patch of green surrounded by miles of dust. "Don't know," he said. "But it's more than yesterday." Henry Holt didn't invent irrigation, the narrator reflects. Humans had been moving water for thousands of years. But what he did, what he figured out alone in a dying field, was how to make every drop count. In a place where water was more valuable than gold, that simple idea became the difference between survival and extinction. The camera pulls back slowly, showing the contrast, Henry's small green patch against an ocean of barren earth. The image holds just long enough for the audience to grasp the weight of what they're witnessing. The first fragile proof that innovation could still emerge from desperation. Fade to the horizon, where dust clouds gather once more. The days grew shorter, but the drought didn't end. By the spring of 1933, most of western Kansas looked like a shadow of its former self. Ghost towns, empty silos, barns stripped to their frames. The landscape that once fed families and fueled dreams now felt cruel, almost personal in its refusal to give life. But somewhere beyond the dust, just east of Garden City, a small miracle was taking shape on Henry Holt's land. His experimental patch, no bigger than a few dozen rows, still stood green while everything else lay brown and broken. It wasn't lush, it wasn't pretty, but it was alive. And in the plains of 1933, that was everything. Henry didn't smile much, even when things worked. He still carried the same quiet expression, as if hope were something dangerous he had to hold carefully. Each morning, he inspected the pipes for leaks, crouching low, his fingers tracing the seams. He built the network from scrap, rusted oil barrels, irrigation ditches, and melted tin solder, but it held. At night, he'd sit by the window, listening. The wind still howled, clawing at the walls of the farmhouse, but he was learning to hear beyond it. The rhythm of storms, the texture of soil, the faint difference between the smell of dry dust and the scent of cooling earth before rain. These became his textbooks. Henry Holt wasn't educated in science, the narrator says softly. But he understood the one rule all great innovators live by. Observation comes before understanding. Every change, every sign of life, he wrote down in the same worn ledger where he'd sketched the first pipes. It was part diary, part laboratory journal, a place where hope turned into data. Moisture deeper, one line noted. Roots thicker. Another page, east section, still green after 6 days no rain. He adjusted small details each season, replacing narrow pipes with wider ones, angling lines slightly downhill to use gravity more effectively. He experimented with materials. Tin, wood, even old fabric lined with wax to slow water absorption. For every improvement, there were failures. Small bursts of hope followed by collapse. But even his failures taught him something. That spring, when the rare rain came again, it lasted only a few hours. Yet Henry's underground system captured more than half of it. By contrast, the open ditches of neighboring farms lost nearly all their water to evaporation before noon. The difference, the narrator explains, was invisible. Henry had learned to keep the water where no wind could steal it. Word began to spread quietly through what remained of the farming community. A pair of brothers from a nearby township stopped by one afternoon after hearing that Holt had green fields in a wasteland. They found him working knee-deep in clay, adjusting the flow gate on one of his channels. They asked how he had done it. Henry didn't answer right away. He washed his hands in a bucket, stood up, and simply said, "You have to listen to the ground before you tell it what to do." It sounded strange, almost mystical. But to men who had spent their lives at the mercy of the earth, those words made sense in a way textbooks never could. Over the following months, he showed them his system. No speeches, no diagrams, just walks through the field, demonstrations with shovels and buckets. When they asked why the pipes were buried instead of laid open, Henry pointed to the horizon. "The sun takes what it can see," he said. "So you hide it." That single sentence would later echo through agricultural circles as the defining principle of modern subsurface irrigation. From desperation, the narrator reflects, Henry found the one resource that rarity had made priceless: control. Not over nature, but within it. As the year continued, the rains became even less frequent. 1934 was approaching, and the storms that followed would darken the sky with dust thick enough to blot out the stars. The newspapers called it the greatest ecological disaster ever to hit North America. Millions of acres lost. Thousands of families uprooted. And yet, amid that catastrophe, Henry's system kept a small patch of Kansas breathing. When government inspectors from the newly formed Soil Conservation Service arrived to document the devastation, they came across Holt's property by accident. At first, they assumed the soil there had escaped the drought's impact by luck. But as one agent ran his hand over the damp, cool ground, he realized something was different. He asked Henry what he was doing. Henry, uncomfortable with strangers, walked them through the basics: buried pipes, slow release, gravity flow. The agent, taking notes, said it sounded inefficient. Henry just shrugged. "I don't need efficiency," he replied. "I need survival." That quiet line would later frame an entire philosophy of Midwestern resource management, making the most of scarcity rather than waiting for abundance. Over time, more neighbors arrived. While some dismissed Holt's strange method as folly, others tried it. They dug ditches, buried improvised pipes, siphoned what little water they could find. It wasn't easy work, and not everyone succeeded, but the very act of trying rekindled something the plains hadn't seen in years: initiative. Margaret watched it all unfold from the porch. The same men who had once shaken their heads when they saw her husband covered in dust now came asking questions. She said little, but she saw the change in him. There was a light in Henry's gaze, a quiet pride not just in his crops, but in proving that ingenuity could still bloom amid desolation. Desperation is a dangerous teacher, the narrator says. But for those willing to learn, it reveals truths hidden in plain sight. In Henry's case, the truth was simple. Water had to move like roots did: slow, unseen, resilient. And just like roots, it had to adapt to survive. By 1934, Henry's method had tripled his yield compared to neighboring farms. It wasn't enough to make him rich, but it kept his family alive when others starved. When the next black blizzard rolled across Kansas that summer, Henry's field didn't blow away. His underground channels kept the soil heavier, anchored by moisture. Once the storm passed, reporters traveling with the Soil Conservation Service took photographs of his land, half buried, but still intact. Those photographs would later appear in small agricultural journals, credited to anonymous, local experimentation. Henry never claimed credit. He didn't think of what he'd built as invention or legacy. To him, it was pure necessity, a way to keep his family from joining the endless caravans heading west. Yet quietly, his ideas spread through word of mouth, carried by farmers desperate for one last chance. At night, as dust settled on the fields and silence returned, Henry would walk the edge of his land. The wind had a softer sound now, moving through the surviving crops. He'd stop sometimes and press his ear to the ground, feeling the faint rhythmic drip of water traveling through his buried pipes, a sound like the earth breathing again. Inspiration doesn't always come from hope, the narrator concludes softly. Sometimes, it rises out of exhaustion, out of a refusal to let the world end without trying something different. The camera widens for the final shot of the chapter. Henry standing ankle-deep in cracked soil, the horizon glowing orange with another setting sun. Behind him, a small patch of green sways gently in the wind, a single defiance against a starving continent. Fade out. The sound of wind fades to the steady drip of water beneath the surface. By spring 1933, Henry Holt's small green patch stood defiant amid the barren plains. While neighbors' fields cracked under endless drought, his wheat swayed gently, a fragile miracle born of buried pipes and quiet observation. "Desperation sharpens the mind," the narrator intones. Henry wasn't chasing theories, he was chasing survival. Rain fell rarely, in furious bursts that evaporated instantly. But Holt's channels captured it, guiding moisture deep underground where roots could reach. He tested relentlessly, adjusting pipe angles for gravity flow, sealing joints with tar-soaked cloth, noting how soil darkened and softened overnight. One evening, lantern in hand, he knelt beside a trench. The earth felt alive again, pliable, breathing. His ledger filled with sketches, grids, slopes, flow rates. No formal education guided him, only decades of feeling the land's pulse. Word trickled out. Skeptical neighbors stopped by, staring at the impossible green. "How?" they'd ask. Holt drew lines in the dust, explaining simply, "Bury the water, let it seep slow." Some scoffed, others tried replicas with scrap metal and barrels. His wife, Margaret, joined the work, patching leaks, carrying buckets. Together, they expanded the system to half his acres. Green spread like hope reclaiming despair. Innovation isn't born in labs, the narrator reflects. It's forged in fields where failure means starvation. By summer's end, Holt's harvest yielded enough for his family. Modest, but real. Shoots that withered elsewhere thrived here. The buried network wasn't pretty, but it worked. Farmers from miles away arrived, desperate for secrets. Holt shared freely, never hoarding. His design rippled outward, a trench here, a pipe there, coaxing life from death. As dust storms loomed again, Holt stood resolute. His patch anchored the soil, too moist to blow away. What began as one man's refusal to quit now whispered possibility across the plains. In the heart of ruin, inspiration strikes, not as lightning, but as steady persistence. The camera lingers on water trickling unseen below cracked earth, roots reaching deeper. Fade as wind gathers, testing what desperation built. 1935 arrived with omens. Air heavy, skies bruised. Then came Black Sunday, April 14th, a wall of dust 10,000 feet high, racing at 60 miles per hour, blotting the sun for hours. The worst storm turned day to night, the narrator says gravely. Dust buried homes, choked engines, killed livestock. America gasped for breath. Henry Holt watched the black horizon from his porch. Winds howled, his farm shook. Margaret sealed windows with wet sheets. Chickens panicked, the dog hid. Holt stayed calm, eyes on his fields. The moist soil from his pipes held firm, no swirling dunes. Inside, dust seeped through cracks. They sat silent, bandanas tight, lamp flickering. Hours passed in suffocating dark. When the storm broke, Holt emerged into a buried world. Fences gone, tools vanished. But his green patch endured, roots anchored by underground water. One system's survival amid catastrophe, the narrator notes. Neighbors trickled in days later, hollow-eyed, homeless. "How?" they begged. Holt sketched in the dust. Pipes, gravity, depth. Desperate hands copied. Trenches across Kansas, pipes from junkyards. "Holt's method," they whispered. Government men arrived too, Soil Conservation Service scouts. They measured, photographed, marveled at yields double the norm. Holt explained plainly, "Hold the rain underground." They nodded, took notes, left nameless. By fall, clusters replicated it. Small victories, patches green where death reigned. Storms lessened, but Holt's design proved resilient, soil stable, crops enduring. Winter froze the pipes, but thaw revealed thriving roots. Holt harvested modestly, granary half full. Margaret smiled. "You beat it." "Not me," Holt replied. "The ground." In 1935's apocalypse, One farmer's grit seeded recovery. Not fanfare, but quiet replication. Aerial view. Isolated greens dotting vast dust. Wind calms. Life persists. Fade on Holt walking resilient rows. By 1936, recovery flickered. Storms waned. Aid flowed. Holt's fields bloomed fully. Wheat golden, soil rich. His pipes, rusted but faithful, fed acres now. Neighbors thrived too, their copies refined. Holt's trenches spread quietly. Government pamphlets touted subsurface irrigation, diagrams mirroring his ledger, crediting no one. Fame favors fanfare, the narrator muses. Persistence works in silence. Soil conservation experts returned, sampling Holt's earth. Remarkable retention, they noted. Holt shrugged. Just holds the wet. Reports praised local innovations. His name vanished. Federal programs adopted it. New Deal funds for channels. Universities teaching gravity flow. Holt's spark fueled policy, unnamed. He rebuilt. New barn, trees as windbreaks. Margaret gardened again. Visitors thanked him. Holt deflected. Land taught me. Aging, Holt watched planes revive. His system blended into progress, refined, scaled, forgotten origin. In 1947, he died peacefully. Farm modest, pipes enduring. Margaret sold portions. New owners found buried relics, hand-dug channels still moist. Decades later, engineers puzzled over them. Early prototype? Holt's story faded. Technique thrived. History honors presidents, patents, not plow-worn hands reshaping Earth from despair. Grandchildren recalled, Grandpa listened to dirt more than men. True essence. Photos, black and white Holt amid green, contrasted modern circles from satellites, his unseen blueprint. Recognition? Holt sought none. Survival sufficed. Yet his quiet creation fed generations. Fade on golden field swaying, legacy buried deep. Generations later, Holt's fields modernized, tractors humming, yields soaring. Surveyors unearthed his pipes, corroded, effective. Pioneer work, they called it, origin lost. The earth outlasts paper trails, the narrator reflects. By 1960s, subsurface irrigation scaled globally. Center pivot systems, Zyback-inspired, greened deserts, Israel, Australia, plains reborn. Holt's gravity principle underpinned them. Water direct to roots, evaporation slashed 60%. Satellites reveal circles, vast green wheels, satellites tracing Holt's ghost. Billions fed today owe scraps to 1932 desperation. Buried channels from dust-choked hands. One farmer's refusal birthed abundance from aridity. Modern Kansas. Bumper crops, aquifers strained but managed. Holt's lesson echoes, respect cycles, innovate humbly. His descendants farm elsewhere, sharing tales. Grandpa beat the bowl with pipes and grit. Museums show Dust Bowl relics, no Holt plaque. Yet soil remembers, resilient patches from his design. Aerial finale. Endless green mandalas, wind harmless. Close on trickle underground. Life persistent. America starved in 1932. Holt invented not glory, but survival's blueprint, still watering the world unseen. What crises birth your innovations? Comment below. Gentle piano fades. Water flows eternal.